me tell you a story. It was 1925, nearly 100 years ago now. And the University of Pennsylvania was doing some excavating in the Iraq desert. Now, all throughout the book of Genesis, we run across this metropolitan city called Ur, but nobody knew where it was. Until Dr. Woolsey, in 1925, found this mound covered by sand. And he began digging and digging and digging and digging. What he excavated was one of the great, called the Seven Wonders of the Ancient World, one of the great wonders of the ancient world. It was, in fact, the temple in the center, the capital of Ur of the Chaldeans. This is where Abraham was called from. It's very likely that what we're going to read today, Abraham himself would have stood at the peak there. Now, this is a photo from the late 20s as they were just excavating this. Saddam Hussein, some of you may know that name. He was a ruler of modern Iraq several years ago. Take a look at the next picture. Rebuilt the ziggurat to sort of regain Assyrian glory from all those years ago. All that to say, once again, archaeology has confirmed what the scriptures have recorded. Abraham, father of our faith, was called out of a real place called Ur, or the capital city of this empire, to go to a place he'd never heard of called Canaan. Now, Genesis chapter 12. While you're there, let me remind you of something we read last week from Hebrews chapter 11. Faith, we're talking about the life of faith, is the assurance of things hoped for. That is, faith looks to the future. There's a confidence about the future. And it is the evidence of things not seen. Faith not only looks to the future, faith deals with those things we have not yet seen. This is the life of faith. And then Hebrews chapter 11, verse 6. Listen. And without faith, listen, it is impossible to please God. When we talk about living by faith, we're really talking about living a life that is pleasing to God. Living by faith is going to look different in your context than it does in mine. It's going to look different maybe for husbands and wives, or parents and children, or students, or those of us in the career world. But make no mistake, every single follower of Jesus Christ, from all the way back to the time of Abraham, that's 4,000 years ago, 2000 BC was when Abraham lived and was called out of Ur of the Chaldeans. We have been called to live by faith. So, Genesis chapter 12. I almost said Romans because we've been there for the last weeks previous to this. Genesis chapter 12. Let's take a look at it. Look at verse 1. Now, at a point in time, when Abraham was just minding his own business, living his life, we'll learn that he was a very successful businessman. He was a rancher. We'll recognize he had an extended family and he had lots of employees, in those days, servants. We'll recognize he was probably pretty well established in the city of Ur. We'll also hear that he was 75 years old, which means he should have been looking forward to retirement, not a brand new adventure of faith. In other words, in a time of prosperity and settledness in a major metropolitan area, God stepped into the flow of history and said, Abram, you're going to do something else. I have greater plans for you. And here it is, Genesis chapter 12. Now, the Lord said to Abram, there are two imperatives, that means two commands in this entire first 9 verses. Here's the first one. Go. Living by faith is not passive. God's going to call us, either literally or metaphorically, to go into some new territory. From your country. And now listen to these 3 descriptors. They become increasingly personal. From your country, United States, we would say today. From your kindred, that's your tribe. In modern parlance, it's our neighborhood, or it's our village. It's that group of 400 or 500 people we all kind of know and we go to work with every day, or school with every day, or church with every day, or every week. And your father's house. Whoa, that's a lot more personal. This is your nuclear family. Abraham, I want you to go away from everything that is familiar in the life you've known until now. Are you ready for this? Look at the end of verse 1. To the land, it's very specific, that I will show you. Right, you like Google Maps, destination. The church here is 1N100 Gary Avenue. Great, go there. It's very specific, turn by turn. God said, Abram, I want you to go somewhere. Where? Well, I'll show you. When? When you start going. Even for me, and I'm about as risk-taker as you can find, that's a little uncomfortable. Because I know my country, I know my kindred, and I know my family. I know my job, and I know my prospects, and hopefully I know something about my plans for the future. God said, Abram, there's something better for you. In fact, what follows here are 7 phrases. The original language is Hebrew. 7 things God promises. There are actually kind of 4 promises with 7 phrases. Let's just walk through them. Look at verse 2. I will. This is God's promise. This is a promise. Abram, when you go to a place that I will show you, go and I will. And by the way, it's unconditional. God says, I'm going to do this thing, Abram. I will make of you a great nation. Pretty good for a guy who had no kids. And I will bless you. I like that. And I will make your name great. Now, what's interesting, the next phrase is the 4th of 7, meaning it's the middle. It's also the second imperative of this entire first section. Literally, be a blessing. Go is the first imperative. Where? Well, I'll show you. And what happens? Be a blessing. I love that. I will make of you a great nation. I will bless you. I will make your name great so that you will be a blessing. Verse 3, I will bless those who bless you, and him who dishonors you I will curse. And in you all the families of the earth will be blessed. 5 times the word blessed shows up. And that last promise is breathtaking. Abram, my plan for you is that every family on earth, all the nations, in you will be blessed. I mean, the first imperative, go. Second imperative, be a blessing. And the capper is, I'm going to make that happen worldwide. It's an incredible blessing. In fact, one Bible scholar says this, Abraham's obedience was a monumental act of faith. He was advanced in years. He was prosperous, settled in his pagan world. He was the only one, listen, he was the only one in his culture who heard God's word. And on the basis of hearing alone, he risked everything to follow God. I love this next phrase. None of us has ever done anything comparable to that. That's why Abraham ended up in the sacred text. We trivialize Abraham's life if we imagine that we've been called to do something that dramatic. What's so dramatic about it is God had, to this point, not revealed himself to people. Oh, we know the story of Adam and Eve. We know some of the ancient history that's related to that. But here in this text, for the first time, God himself reached down and selected someone and said, through you, I will accomplish my plan. His plan is to bless every nation. We know today, at this side of the cross of Jesus Christ, it's in the person of Jesus Christ, Abraham's greater son, that blessing was accomplished. But listen to what one Old Testament scholar writes about the city in which Abram lived, Ur. In fact, Chad, why don't you go and put up the ruins again of that ziggurat? Listen. The city of Ur was dominated by a massive 3-stage ziggurat built by the greatest king, Ur-Nammu. This would have been the king very close to Abraham's time. It's the beginning of the 2nd millennium BC. Each stage was colored differently, with the top level bearing the silver one-room shrine to Nana, the moon god. You can imagine in a desert culture like that where it's so hot and unforgiving during the day, the cool of the moon was something they enjoyed, and so they began to worship. This was the moon god shrine. Nanu, Bible sometimes calls this moon god or this worship called Sin, S-I-N. It looks like sin, but it's pronounced Sin. Listen, and Abraham was a moon worshiper. The royal cemetery reveals that ritual burials were sealed with the horror of human sacrifice in that topmost silver room. As a moon worshiper, Abraham had stood atop the ziggurat stargazing platform at night and offered his worship. He may well have witnessed the dark side of moon worship in that silver room. At times, he may have mused that there must be something greater than the order of nature and the waxing and waning of the moon. But he didn't know until God said to him, Abram, through you, the nations are going to be blessed. And so he says, go, gives him a 7-part promise. And then he went. Now look at verse 4. So Abraham went, and I underline this next phrase, as the Lord had told him. Let me be very clear with us as we talk these next 4 weeks about a life of faith, about my meant for more, about what is it God's called me to do. Let me be really clear. This is not about following or fulfilling your own dreams. Yeah, you should certainly do that, but when it comes to living by faith, that's about responding to God's specific call. That's about living in obedience. It's not about fulfilling our dreams. It's about obeying God's call. Abraham went because God had told him to do that. He had given him specific instructions. In fact, verse 4 tells us a little more about when he went, what that meant for him. Lot went with him. Abram was 75 years old. He departed from Haran. So he basically went from Ur up north and a little bit west to Haran, another ancient capital on the southern edge of Turkey, and then down to Canaan. Look at verse 5. He took Sarai his wife and Lot his brother's son and all of their possessions they had gathered and the people that they had acquired in Haran. And Haran was a big business city. Think of Singapore or Hong Kong or something like that. And they set out to go to the land of Canaan. Now, he had never been there, never heard of that, but God said, this is where I want you to go. End of verse 5, when they came to the land of Canaan, Abraham passed through the land to the place at Shechem, the oak of Moreh. At that time, the Canaanites were in the land. 3 things you need to know about that verse. Shechem is the geographical center of Canaan. But as far as we know, God still hadn't said anything to him. He's just like, God says, go, where? Well, just follow. Go where I'm telling you, this direction. And it's when he gets to the center of that place that God gives him this next piece of information. But he's at the oaks of Moreh. Interesting, it means a diviner, a vision, an idol worshiper, a visionary. And then third, and the Canaanites were there. Abraham, you're coming to a new place in response to God's call. You don't know exactly where. And when you get there, it's like, wow, there's a lot of idol worshipers here, just like where I came from. They worship the idol or the god of the moon. Here it's other idols. And there are a lot of people around here. I'm going to have to settle in and live in this culture. What's that going to look like? So, this is what happened next. Look at verse 7. This is just so good. This is what I was so excited about. I was yelling at Austin in a good way on the phone last night. Then the Lord appeared to Abram and he said, now listen. It's the first time there's specificity. It's the first time Abraham learns, oh, this is the place. To your offspring I will, what's the verb? So good. Go becomes give when we obey. For 6 verses, verses 1 through 6, all Abraham knows is one thing. Go! Where? I'll show you. And he goes. And every step that man took was a step of faith into a place he didn't know about. And he gets to the center of the land in a place called Shechem. He recognizes that there are strange cultures there. There's a lot of idol worship there. And God says, this is the place. And go became give. I will give you this land. Now, look at the response, the end of verse 7. So Abraham built there an altar to the Lord who had appeared to him. It's worship. It's a response of saying, thank you, God. And listen, for the first time in history, the God of the universe was worshiped in the Holy Land. And it all began because Abraham responded to God's somewhat nebulous call, go! And when he went, God said, now I'll give. Look at verse 8. Listen, like Abraham's my kind of guy. Because for most of us, like, okay, I'm here, let me settle in. How can I buy some property? Let's do some real estate investing. And remember what God said? What did God say? What was the one word? What was the one command? The one imperative? What is it? Come on, say it out loud. Come on, like you mean it. He didn't say stay. I love that. He said, I'm going to give you this land. And so look at what Abraham did next. He moved to the hill country on the east of Bethel and pitched his tent with Bethel on the west and Ai on the east. He's like, I want to see more. He kept moving. He wasn't content with one step of obedience. He obeyed. God blessed. Said, this is the place. He built an altar and they said, now I want to go see the next place. Love that. In fact, look at verse 8 there. He built an altar to the Lord and he called on the name of the Lord. The second time, now in the second place, God of the universe has revealed himself and Abraham is responding in faith. He's leading worship. In this case, interesting the term worship here, he called, it's an outward. This might have been the first time a sermon was preached. There was a spoken act of worship, not just building an altar, but here calling out on the name of the Lord. And now wait, hold on. Did I tell you I like Abraham? Look at verse 9. What's it say? Come on, somebody read it out loud to me. And Abraham, what did he do? He journeyed on. That is such my guy. He's like, this is so great. Can I get a little more? And the Lord's like, just keep going. It's going to be good. So, question for you. How can I hear God's call? I've said that this is not about fulfilling your dream. It's about living by faith. That's not easy. All God's people should be saying, it's hard. Can I give you some examples of what it means? When I say live by faith, here's what I mean by that. Living by faith, and I'm just thinking Ephesians says God has blessed us with every spiritual blessing in Jesus. Like it's part and parcel of being in the body of Christ. Like with Abraham, you're already blessed. Multiple ways. But what's it mean? To live by faith. To grasp those blessings that are in the future and so often unseen. By faith, I believe that God will use my suffering for my good and his glory. Because it sure doesn't look like that now, does it? By faith, I believe that resisting sin is worth it. That as God has done in my family, he may break generational chains and habits of sin. It's worth it. You don't see that, and it's future focused. But I believe it by faith. By faith, I believe that serving others will grow me and bless them. By faith, I believe that protecting and rearing my children in the discipline and instruction of the Lord is good for them, even in a culture that fights against discipline and instruction. And every mother I know, especially of young children, says, man, what a war it is. You know, multiple kids, it's like 2 against 1 or 3 against 1 or 5 against 1 or 8 against 1. And it's a war of attrition. They'll wear you down. It is worth it. And when you are so tired, your eyes are bloodshot, and you're sobbing through your tears at yet another poopy diaper, you're going to have to hold on to faith. It's worth it. Faith means I'm putting God first in my finances. That will honor him and prosper me. I remember early on, our first bookkeeper, CPA, he's since retired and moved to Florida. He says, Scott, I cannot make the numbers add up. I just can't. But we have never been more blessed. The guy's a brand new believer. I baptized him, a few years ago now. Faith is choosing to obey God in the face of fear and uncertainty and opposition, and recognizing that is for our best. It's for our good. I talk about living by faith. That's the kind of choices I'm talking about. And some of you likely God has already raised in your mind, and you're saying, Scott, how did you know? I didn't. Somebody said to me after the service last weekend, how did you know? This was exactly what we needed. So this stuff gets planned out months in advance, but God knows. And so living by faith. It's very practical. It's not ethereal out there. It's how do I make decisions today, that are rooted in, my decisions that are rooted in the fact that God actually does keep his promises. And that is a life, as I said last week, that is the most thrilling and fulfilling you will ever choose. In fact, Chad, go and put that note up. It's a thesis verse. Living by faith is the most thrilling and fulfilling choice you will ever make. So let's close this message by asking this question. How can I hear God's call? How can I hear God's call? And there's going to be a bullet-pointed list there. By the way, these are all in the study guide, so you can either take pictures or take notes or take a look at the study guide. It's also, Chad, did we mention the study guide? It can be downloaded, right? We already put that up there. Good. Thank you for that. And how can I hear God's call? Here's what you need to know about God's call. When you are evaluating, is this what God's called me to do? Am I hearing right? Am I going to live by faith and take these next steps? Here's what you need to recognize. God's call will always advance his mission to bless the world. Like there should not be any dissonance between God's revealed will in his scriptures and among his church and godly counsel from others, and you're saying, no, I want to do the other thing, go the opposite way. I want to go back to Ur. No. God will reveal his will to you. We'll be called to walk in faith and obedience to that, and it's always going to be something in alignment that will advance his plan to bless the world, his mission to bless the world. It will be connected to a promise. God said to Abraham, get up, go. And then 7 phrases that encapsulated 4 promises. I love that the middle one is be a blessing. How can I hear God's call? It will advance his mission. It will be connected to a promise. It will be specific to you. Like that. Because I don't live your life. Your context, your family, your work, your school. God's going to ask you to live by faith, not someone else's life, but your own. Like, it's hard enough for me to live my life by faith. I can't imagine trying to live somebody else's. How can I hear God's call? It's going to advance his mission. It's connected to a promise specific to you. It's going to require a step of faith. I just love, right? Go became give only after Abraham obeyed. God's voice is often heard in a crisis. We didn't read it, but in chapter 11 it says, after Abraham's father died, his father's name was Terah. After Terah died, that's when God said, now Abraham, your life's already unsettled. You've lost your patriarch, your father. Time to go. Now, maybe if you were in a place of kind of crisis, uncertainty, or like the law to change coming on you, it may be God's using that tempest to shake you a little bit, and you need to be listening carefully. What is God saying to me? Is there a step of obedience I need to take? Am I running into like the merry-go-round of conflict over the same thing all the time? It may be next time you're coming around that thing, you say, hold on. What would a step of faith in obedience to God's call look like, and it would bless my circumstance? How can I hear God's call? It's going to advance his mission. It's going to be connected to a promise. It's going to be specific to you. It's going to require a step of faith. It's often going to be heard, God's voice heard in a crisis, and it's going to bring future blessing. And here's the challenge, right? Here's the challenge. Between the promise we hear, do this, follower of Jesus, and the blessing that's always future, we live by faith. This is where we're living right now. In the tension and the uncertainty, past promise, future blessing, today, I live by faith. How can I live by faith? By taking the next step of obedience. We live in faith between the promise and the blessing. Now listen, I love this. It's one of those technical, the book is called a commentary. It's kind of comments on the text, verse by verse. And this particular one is, Victor Hamilton's the author. It's pretty technical. Covers a lot of language stuff. I kind of like it, but I don't understand half of what I read. Don't tell everybody that, but listen, it's so good. Abraham cannot be a blessing if he stays in Ur. I mean, that's so good. The blessings of God are not all to be turned in on Abram. A great nation, blessed, a great name, yes. But Abraham must be more than a recipient. He is both a receptacle of blessing and a transmitter of that blessing. It's good. Listen, hear me. You stay where you are now, you will not be a source of blessing to others. Do you hear that? Thank you, Tisa. You're going to have to get up and go. Where? Well, God will tell you. What's going to happen next? Give. You go, God gives the blessing. You sit still. Well, that's a great blessing out there somewhere. This is the life of faith. I'll give you an example of that. We were down in Indianapolis Thursday night, Friday, and seeing the kids. Our daughter, son-in-law, grandson are in from Texas, and so we went down to see the other grandkids down in Indianapolis, and I took our 4-year-old grandson, Nathan, over to our son Nate's church, where Nate's pastor. They were working on a project, and we were working on something. I was standing there, and little Nathan was helping me, like keep him away from the power tools, but he did have a hammer. He kept swinging around. I'm trying to get out of his. At one point, you just can't make this stuff up with kids, right? At one point he said, are you ready for that? He said, "Move it along, Grandpa." I'm like, what? Because he was taking a little piece of board out to the dumpster. He was fired up about this. "Move it along, Grandpa." Listen, your next step of faith, move it along, Grandpa. Don't be sitting back waiting. Abraham heard go, he went, God gave. Let's do that. All right, let me pray for you. Father, again, I get to the end of a message, feel like I'm skimming along the surface, barely touching all the good stuff. But you have given us such good stuff. Lord, you have given promises to us. You have called us to obey. Some are here, Lord, they know exactly what you've called them to do. Lord, give them the courage to walk in obedience and faith. Others, Father, and they're just not sure. I pray that they would, even today, this week, seek your call, hear your voice. What is that step of obedience? That thing they're going to need to get out of their comfort zone and do. And Father, some have taken tremendously courageous steps of faith. They're still waiting for the blessing. They're living in the tension between the promise and the blessing. I pray, Lord, that you would give us the courage, the faith to persevere. Father, I don't want to end a message like this without pointing to Abraham's greater son, the greatest blessing, Jesus Christ. That's how all the nations are blessed. Jesus died on the cross and rose again, and then he he called his followers together. He said the exact same thing that you, Father, said to Abraham. Go! In this case, we're to go and we're to make disciples. So, Lord, help us to share our faith. Pray for any here who do not know Jesus, they would respond in faith, believe that he is the Son of God, died, was buried, rose again. God, give us the courage in our faith. Help us to do like Abraham did. Proclaim it, Lord, by worshiping you. Make it so, we ask, in Jesus' strong name. All God's people said, amen. All right, now Max, we're going to do an audible. All right, so keep holding that for just a minute. I want to send you out with a blessing. And in the book, there are two things. One is a memory verse. So let's stand up. We're going to say the memory verse together. And then there's a short prayer I've written that actually grows right out of the verse. We're going to say that together as our benediction today. All right, we good with that? Okay, good. I mean, I'm just like seeking your permission is all I'm saying. And so here's the verse. Let's say this together. You ready? I will bless you so that you will be a blessing. What's the address? Genesis 12:2. Now, here's the closing prayer. We're going to say this prayer together, all right? And this will be our close, right? Ready? Say this with me. Lord, bless me and make me a blessing to others. Amen. Go in peace.